Welcome to Triple B, where we are Black, beautiful, and brave.
Where our goal is to inspire and empower Black single women to embrace their beauty and to be brave. I'm Candy.
I'm Ayanna, and we are your hosts.
Thank you for joining us today on our Black, Beautiful, and Brave podcast. Why Black? Why beautiful? Why brave?
We created this space for several reasons: to hear from a Black Christian woman's perspective, to empower single women.
We want to address issues that affect Black women from our lenses, not the males, not the society, the world, not the church. Our perspective.
Everybody has something to say about Black, single Christian women except us.
Oftentimes, Black women's voices are in a box.
We are not a monolith.
Everyone has something to say about Black professional and non-professional Christian women who are single.
But no more. Enough.
It is our time to talk transparently and to create change.
All right, let's go. Let's do it.
We want the rest of the world to hear what we talk about. Welcome back. We are back on Black, Beautiful, and Brave.
Triple B.
Triple B is here, and we have a special guest with us today.
We do. So with us, we have Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith, author, dean, mom, entrepreneur, motivational speaker. She's here with us.
And a grandma.
She doesn't look like a grandma, though. She doesn't look like a grandma.
Welcome, Rachel.
So glad to have you.
We are so happy that you're here with us today on Black, Beautiful, and Brave. And just by looking at you, we know that you are Black, beautiful, and brave.
Well, thank you. And I'm thrilled to be with two other women who are Black, beautiful, and brave as well.
Awesome. Wonderful. And so today we wanted to invite you here to our podcast. Really wanted to hear your story, right? Mm-hmm. And she actually has put her story to paper.
Right. So she has a book, right? And not only one book, but she has a new edition of that book, Born Yesterday.
Yes.
Right. It's an awesome book, awesome read. I have told her that on numerous occasions, but now she even has an updated version of it. And she's here to tell us about her book, but not just the book, but the story, right? Her story.
But before we get into all of that, Rachel, tell us, who are you? Mm-hmm. Who is Rachel?
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to figure that out since I was born. So I'd like to think of myself as a person who is a Christian, not in the religious sense of the word, but in the sense of the word of someone who's invited Christ to live in my heart and to dwell in my life and make a difference and to use my life to make a difference.
Okay.
So that kind of Christian where hopefully I can be salt and light. And actually I say when I pass from this world, I want them to just put on my gravestone, she made a difference, if I did.
Oh.
Because that's what's important to me. You shouldn't pass through this world and not make it a better place somehow for having been here.
Right.
And my prayer every day is, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth, like this piece of earth that is moving around Rachel, as it is in heaven.
Wow, that's deep.
So that's my goal. So that's, first of all, who I am, a child of God, one who's he's redeemed. Sometimes we are redeemed from, some of our stories are being redeemed from the guttermost, right? Mine is being redeemed from too much religion, from self-righteousness, from legalism. And yes, I've also had those experiences that have been really lows in my life as well, which I shouldn't have considering all the Bible that I knew. So I know the saving grace of Jesus Christ because I've experienced it on both ends of my life. And where would I be if it were not for grace? So those two things about who I am. And then I'm also a mother. And yes, I am a grandmother, but since I'm raising the grandchildren as my children right now, I therefore will stick with the mother title. All right. Okay. So right now, I wish I had a grandmother to come and do grandmotherly things with them.
So you have a lot of titles, Rachel.
Yeah, and I'm dean at the School of Journalism and Communication here at my university, and I do enjoy speaking. Yes. I am an author, as you mentioned, in some other roles. I don't know. That's enough, I think, to just kind of touch around the edges.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Right. So lots of questions. I read your book, so I know what's in the book. For our listeners, why did you? I'm going to start because that's something I think I'm not sure if I ever asked you. Why did you write that book? Like, what inspired you to write a book? We'll talk about it, though, writing a book.
Well, let me give you the full title, first of all. The full title is Born Yesterday, The True Story of a Girl Born in the 20th Century but Raised in the 19th. And in the title is a clue of why I might have written the book. Not too many people were born in the modern age but were raised a century ago.
Right.
So it is a story of having been raised in 19th century style living and thinking, and even, I would say, association, because I lived so much in my mind with the people that I had come to know as the people in my life, the founders of our church and so forth. Right. They were real and living people to me. So I had been raised with a mindset that was a century ago. And that was all because my parents believed that the world was coming to an end. So a lot of people in my church tradition are focused on Jesus' return.
Right, which we should be, right?
Well, I think it's important to understand that he is going to return. But remember, the disciples in the first century believed Jesus was going to return too.
True.
So I think that the thing, so just taking a detour for a moment to answer that, I think the thing we have to understand is the certainty of his return.
Right.
The nearness, we always measure time in our understanding of soon, or a long time. We measure it in our understanding of time. I think it's First Peter, where it talks about that 1 year is to the Lord. One day is as 1,000 years.
Right.
1,000 years is 1 day. In other words, God's perspective on time and ours is completely different. So why are you trying to decide for God only? Jesus said, I don't even know, and that's because he chose to lay aside his divinity in terms of using it. So while he was here on earth, he wasn't calling on his divine knowledge to know when he would return, right?
Right.
So if Jesus wasn't obsessed about the when, we don't need to be obsessed about the when in that sense, conscious of it, preparing for it, looking for it, letting it give us hope, allowing it to keep us from making our mindset and our perspectives of this world, but rather of eternity. In that sense, straining toward the second coming, but not an obsession of time. So my parents had an obsession with time. They were setting dates. They were writing charts. They
believed that Jesus was coming soon, just now, like the next day.
Like within the next, well, it wasn't the next day, but it was like within the next 10 years.
Okay.
So they had, my father was a prophecy guru. So he did charts and graphs and he poured over the prophecies. And it was what he loved. But I'm going to say this right off. If what you focus on and emphasize is not what is central to our faith, then you're going to always be a little bit off balanced.
Yeah.
And what is central to our faith? Paul states it. Jesus Christ and him crucified.
Right.
No matter how great and important the truths may be that you are pursuing, if the truth is not the center, as in capital T, Jesus Christ, if he's not the center, foundation, start and beginning of everything you do, then it's going to be off base. So anyway, I kind of got off into...
No, that's all right. You were setting the foundation. So just to give our listeners a little more, so putting the timeline here. So you said you're born in the 20th century. So that's in the late 1965, right? Mm-hmm. And then we're now in 2024. But you were living like you were in the 18th century, which was like in the 19th century.
19th century. So like 18, from 1844 through 1888.
Right.
All the time of our pioneers.
Right.
And they were making it. So that was my orientation. I mean, these people, like if you watch there's a couple of Adventist movies out, and I've watched, I know of two, I've watched them both.
Yeah.
And when I was watching, there's one, Tell the World, and I felt like I actually wrote an article. It was when it came out.
Right.
So this is probably going back about 8 years now, but I actually wrote an article that got published. I think it was in the Review, where I was like, I'm watching this movie, but I'm living it in my, because it was so real to me.
Right, because
based on how I grew up. Right.
So, because that was set in the 1800s.
Yes. So let me put some skin on that because because you don't have a picture for that. Right. It's just a concept.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people who are very much focused on Jesus coming.
Right.
Or they have a very historistic view. They're always looking back to the pioneers of our faith. They're quoting, all of the testimonies say and so forth. But let me put some lifestyle contours on what we're talking about. So I was raised wearing a bonnet.
I was going to ask you that.
Like a broad brim bonnet, like you see Amish wear. Not the little cap that sits on the back of your head, but a bonnet. And I don't mean putting on the bonnet.
And you're a black woman in a bonnet.
Yes, I'm a black woman in a bonnet. So let me put a context on that. I'm not talking about I put on a bonnet for a few minutes a day and I'm playing. I'm talking about I wear a bonnet every day. Pretty much all day.
All day.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle.
It was a lifestyle. I wore a long dress.
When you say long, like how?
Like down to the ankles, down to the foot.
Wow.
Yes. So
did you buy these dresses?
No, my mother began making my dresses when I was 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
Well, first she took the dresses I had and put a border of material around the bottom and put some rickrack around the the seam. And that was how we started. And I didn't like it, so then she started making my clothes. So, homemade long dresses, long sleeves for the most part. My mom would let me wear 3/4 length sleeves for summer.
Oh, so
that was a great compromise.
So your sleeves had to be down to your wrist.
Yes.
So nothing on your arm should be showing.
Well, my mom would do 3/4 length, so mid-arm. That was my short sleeve right there, and that was for summer. And that was a great compromise.
Now, did you have siblings?
I did. I had 2 brothers.
So what were your brothers wearing?
So my brothers generally wore suspenders because that nothing should be hanging from the waist. It should be suspended from the shoulders.
Wow.
So even if they're wearing jeans, it was, because my mom didn't make jeans, but she would make corduroy pants and things like that.
Oh, I think corduroy.
But sometimes it was easy to get, find a secondhand store with jeans, but they'd have to wear the suspenders with it as a general rule. Now, as they got older, they couldn't always make them, but that's, and once again, generally the long sleeves, although they would roll theirs up to the elbow,
Right.
but everything looked 19th century.
Wow.
So think Black Amish, right?
Amish, okay.
Think one family instead of a community.
Right.
And now you're approaching, so we're talking about no electricity. We're talking about no, the plumbing,
Right.
indoor plumbing. I think no heating and air. Think no media.
Wow.
The thing that would differentiate us from Amish were our doctrinal beliefs.
Right.
We kept the Sabbath and the state of the dead, basic doctrines like that.
Right.
And we had a car. We also had a rodeo tiller that we would use for our garden.
Right.
All right? But for the most part, think Black Amish. And you got a picture of me. Hence the title of my book.
So if we again put it in context, so in let's say it's the 1960s into 1970s, would have been like bell bottoms and 80s.
Early 80s.
So the people, let's say everyone else was wearing bell bottoms and had their big afros and the, I guess, skin-fitting clothes and, like platform shoes, right? Because some of the styles are coming back in, so for the fashionistas among us.
Yes.
Right, but instead of wearing that, you have on a bonnet, a skirt down to a dress down to the ground. And your siblings are in suspenders.
Hey, check. Going back to that, he was far out, dude.
Far out, dude, right?
Where did you grow up now? Were you in the midst of other community members who believed and had the same type of lifestyle? Or were you within the world, within the community, where you would see everyone who looked different from you?
Yeah, great question. So my lifestyle changes started when I was 5 and 6 years old. It began with the diet. And it kind of culminated with our education when my parents took us out of school.
Right.
So then the law began to chase us because back then it wasn't legal to homeschool your children. So then, we had a little van, took off in our van. My parents weren't going to let them take their children and interfere with our life. So then we were kind of mobile home, bus, running from the law. So we're talking about mostly Alabama, Tennessee.
Wow.
Right? Close to the border of Alabama, Tennessee. We lived for 1 year in a state park. So, yes, I saw a lot of things when we were living in the state park, but I was probably 7 and 8 years old when that was happening. So you see things, but you're pretty much under your parents' shelter at that time. But, yeah, I saw the I smelled the weed. I saw the platform shoes, the wild hair.
Right.
They would come up to the park and have rock concerts, and my parents would have to whisk us away.
Wow.
But that was 1 year. So we're living in the woods there in the state park. But then my parents bought 50 acres.
Right.
So we kind of gone from one people's piece of property to another. And then the state park, and then my parents bought a property, 50 acres out in the middle of nowhere. So in Tennessee,
Right.
but it was an undeveloped area. So there was not even the power lines to have electricity.
Right.
There was no plumbing options. There was just an old house, and we moved our bus up there, and we carved out a living by growing our own food and making our own clothes, treating our own medical.
So no doctor visits or anything like that?
No.
Because I know in the book you have a picture where you cut off, there's some piece of land that you cleared off to live on out of this, and you're surrounded by forests.
That's right.
In the middle of Tennessee.
Up on a hill.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And it could be hard to access it. At certain times the road would flood out, or if it snowed up there, whatever, it could be hard to access. So then we had a mailbox, a big mailbox at the bottom of the hill.
Right.
So we'd walk the mile down to the mailbox, to that dirt road. So we're not talking about to the paved roads. We're talking about dirt road, and there was a Black community down there.
Oh, wow.
And so we'd sometimes see those people when we'd go down there.
Right.
Hello.
So you see how they're dressed as well? Would you see how they're dressed differently?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We saw a lot of things that hinted at history, like segregation undone. I still remember when we walked down to the mailbox one day, my brothers and I, and one little boy who lived up on a hill above our mailbox saw us, and so he came running down to speak to us. The people that done in the community, they were used to these strange bonneted people that lived up on the hill,
Wow.
And so he was telling us how his school, it was the Giles County School, that was at the end of the gravel road there, a couple miles down, was being closed, and he was being bused to the Pulaski School, and he didn't like it, and he was telling us about that because it was all white school. So I'm getting to see history, but I had no context for what I'm seeing because, of course, I wasn't exposed to the news. We weren't watching it.
Right.
My sense of news, anything I got, what was happening, was from reading snippets of old newspaper.
Wow.
We would go down to the valley about once a month and collect newspaper from the people who would save it for us so we could start our fires.
Wow.
Each had a stove in our own room.
Right.
We would tear up the paper to help us to be able to start a fire.
Right.
And sometimes I was supposed to just be tearing it up, but sometimes I had it down to a science. Rip. So they constantly hear the constant shredding, but I got a paper here on the floor and I'm reading. And you're
reading it to try to keep up with the world.
Series of how a Tennessean, the Tennessean, the Nashville produced paper for Tennessee. I had a reporter who did a whole series on infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan.
Right, which by the way started where?
Right there in Pulaski, Tennessee.
And y'all were living in the mountains of Tennessee.
Yeah, about 7 miles from Pulaski.
Wow.
So I don't remember whether it was 7 or 9, how many series articles there were, but I actually read all but two of the whole series.
Wow.
Because I kept looking for them, and I found them, put them together, and I kept reading, but I'd be ripping that paper so no one know what I'm doing. I'm busy reading.
Wow.
That's my little snippets of news. Very interrupted, So the reason why I wrote the book is because people constantly had questions of how did you transition from that to being, what you are today.
Right.
And so you try to answer that question over and over, and eventually it's like, read my book.
And in your book, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, you have experienced so many different things. I mean, people may hear and think, oh, well, that's okay. Like we see people who dress differently, but it's beyond that because you had to transition from that lifestyle to coming out and living like quote unquote in the real world.
Yeah.
Adapt to the real world. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah. We were ideologically as well as circumstantially and socially raised to not be in this world. So it was not just a matter of, you're living out in the country. It's not just a matter of how we believe. It's also how you're dressing and how you're thinking about the world. And so there were key things that happened. My father ended up abandoning us up there on that hill.
After bringing you all there.
After bringing us there. And what happened, I think, with him was just that he began to realize that Jesus wasn't coming. And he had no plan B.
Wow.
His whole plan was to create this outpost,
Right.
bring his family out from the city,
Right.
put them in the country, prepare them for Jesus' return.
Right.
And then Jesus just wasn't cooperating with that.
Right.
And he began to realize this is not working. So he decided he had to go and get himself set up for life somehow.
Wow.
And so he left us. He told me that he never actually meant to forever leave, but he had to go take care of himself first.
Wow. After bringing the entire family to live in this. And then we just add he was a former vet. He was a veteran.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a medic in the Air Force, and he was also Vietnam. He did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He also did Korean War as well.
So he decided that, one, I'm going to move my family based on my conviction to transition from, I guess if you would say the city to a state park to now on 50 acres of land. And now that he has this new understanding or, I guess, newfound belief that maybe he was wrong, instead of, okay, now let's, as a family unit, transition to find whatever is next, he decides to leave you guys there.
So I think there's something about it when you have total belief in something, and unfortunately our beliefs do not make reality what they are. So I don't think it was like he acquired a new belief. It's just a reality began to dawn. And my brother was 19.
Right.
He was asking to get a job.
Right.
He finally landed a job at a Murray Bike Company in Tennessee.
Right.
He was insisting on taking the family car and driving to work every day.
Wow.
This was not something that, and then he's watching my next brother, who's a year younger, is right along behind, wanting his job, wanting to do his thing. And then he's looking at me, and I never told anyone, but my big secret aspiration in life, like if I could accomplish this in life, I knew I would arrive, and that was to get a job at
Well, let me just say, you're qualified. Right now, you are qualified to work at Walmart.
Make that dream come true. True. And that was because there was a Mennonite community in the area.
Yeah.
And one of the Mennonite daughters, she was working at Walmart.
Whoa.
So here she is. I mean, the Mennonites are a little cap. It's not quite, but still, it was like, oh, she can do it. I can do it too.
Wow.
So that was my dream.
Wow.
But I couldn't, of course, share my dreams.
Right.
But I think my father just realized, when your mindset is so total, and you don't have any plan B, you don't have any exit ramp, whatever, it can lead to some drastic choices and decisions.
Right.
So I'm not saying he did the right thing. He did.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm not bringing condemnation on him, because I know when you're trying to figure it out in the moment, you sometimes don't do it right.
And then I'm just going to have a caveat there, because so he also, as a veteran, I mean, even it could have been like he probably had his own mental health challenges coming back from the war, not being accepted. That would have been segregation, Jim Crow laws at the time. I mean, he obviously had his own challenges.
And my dad was a fair-skinned individual, so fair that except for his crinkly hair, which was flaming red, so like copper red, so people often didn't realize he was black. But when they did, of course, that caused new problems. And then he looked like a white man married to a black woman because he didn't want his children to go through the struggles he did. There's all kinds of things going on here. And yes, they went through the whole segregation thing. Much of that happened before we went out on the Hill, but still, some of it was still occurring. And yes, he was facing all of those challenges. He actually used his discharge money from the service to buy the property.
Yeah.
So that's how he got it. He asked for it all in one lump sum.
Yeah.
And that's what he used.
Wow. So, all right. So that was the beginning, right? But I don't want you to give away all of the book, because we want people to go get the book as well, right? Because it is very exciting.
Yes, like when you asked about my father and his mental health.
Yes.
There's something in the book that I reveal at the end that I don't want to reveal now over here. You have to find out some of what the problem was.
Yeah, and it was, some of the stuff you wrote was real shocking. Like even that whole, when talking about that part with him, and I was like, what? I had to go back and reread. I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you move from living in the bushes to living in the city?
Yeah. So it wasn't a one-step process. God was very kind to me. My brothers, it was a different situation. They went from the Hill to Houston, Texas area. And they went through all kinds of stuff. I mean, their story is just amazing, pathetic, heart-wrenching. It's amazing that they survived, literally, because they just didn't understand cultural norms. They didn't understand societal rules. They didn't understand a million things. They're just out there, these woolly-headed guys with their odd-looking clothes and trying to make it, right? And trying to figure out how to survive as Black young men in Texas.
Wow. So why Texas, though? Like, why? How did they?
So a traveling missionary came up to the Hill, and he was telling us that we could make all this money if we would come to Texas and help them build houses, because they were having a housing boom.
Wow.
And so that's when my father originally left. But on his way out, and he took my older brother with him, but on his way out, he let my mother know in no uncertain terms, using language that I wasn't familiar with, that he was through with her, he was through with life on the Hill, and he wasn't coming back.
This is your father or your brother?
That was my father. My brother was just sitting there like, just... and then my younger brother, within months, he ended up, he had gone through an experience. We'd been horribly burned in a gas fire. And from the time that happened, he was just a different person. He was just enraged with life and wanted to go. It wasn't a couple months, it was a couple of years before. But he just wanted to get away. And he wanted to leave behind everything. So eventually, he was able to follow them to Texas. And so that left my mom and I, and we just couldn't handle. There's no way. I mean, you're talking about to build a fire, you've got to not only tear up paper and gather kindling, you've got to chop wood and split logs and maybe down trees too. And, there's just a lot of work that had to happen just to build a fire, to be warm, or to cook food.
Wow.
And imagine for every process, you have to go through all this manual labor, plus the planting and the harvesting. And there was just no way we could handle it ourselves.
Wow.
So we had to leave. And that's what got me out of here, out of there. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, when you left with you and your mother, did you guys continue with the same type of lifestyle, such as the way you dress?
Yes.
And the leaves?
Yes. I left there wearing a bonnet and a long dress. And so you asked me about how did I get, the next step was I ended up going to, I wanted to go to school. I had never been to school in my whole life.
But your homeschool, though, that's a big thing now. People homeschool.
Well, I was kept at home.
Right.
There was a little homeschooling, but I was kept at home. I would say around the age of 12 was when the most homeschooling occurred. And then, but for the most part, I was kept at home. My brothers, when they dropped out of homeschool, there was nothing that happened after that.
Wow.
So when I finally went to a little what they describe as a self-supporting school, meaning it wasn't supported by the denomination, but it was in Canada, in British Columbia, and I attended. I sent my picture. You should see my picture. It's so cute. It's in the book. I have my bonnet and my long dress, and I'm holding my little Bible, looking so pious. I said, and they actually accepted me.
Wow.
So that was the place where transition began to.
And how old were you at that time?
I was 16, going on 17.
Okay.
That occurred. So yeah.
So did you have any interactions with any teenage boys at that time? Did you have...
Don't get to the boys first. I mean, just trying to interact with the girls was hard enough.
Okay.
So they had a work-study program, and the girls, many of them wore long dresses, not all of them. Of course, nobody wore bonnets, and I was a weirdo. Most of the girls wore their dresses just below their knee at that point.
But were you the only Black person?
I was the only Black person. I was the only Negro person. There was one girl who came from South Africa, but she made it clear that she wasn't Black. She was, and she didn't have hair like mine. She didn't. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, and so that was 1 year of the time. And the rest of the time, there wasn't even anybody brown around. I was the only person. And so anyway, yeah, the only reason why I tested at a first grade level when I got there was because that was in math, is that was the lowest the test would score.
Wow.
Not because I had achieved first grade math. Yeah. So sciences, once again, really low. Social sciences didn't know much. I mean, my IQ test was terrible.
Right.
Because I couldn't understand the context of the questions.
So by this time, you're saying you're a 16-year-old with a less than first grade level understanding of math.
Yeah. Math and sciences were pretty down there, too. Probably a third grade level of understanding. And I knew the bones of the body, though.
And this is about, by now, 1990?
So this would be, 1982 when I left home. to go to Fountain View, and I graduated from Fountain View. That's the name of the school in 1985.
So how long did it take you? You said you entered at 16. How old were you when you left?
I was 19.
19.
19 when I
And so from 16 to 19, how much education were you able to accomplish? Would it be more so elementary through high school? You were able to get all of that knowledge?
pretty much.
Wonderful.
Yeah, because I had to do catch up on everything. Now, what was really good was when it came to reading, language. My understanding of language arts was great, and I liked to write.
Okay.
So those were things that got developed there,
Yeah.
and they built on that to help me move forward. But math remained an obstacle. They even assigned me my own private tutor,
Yeah.
and she'd spend hours with me, and I just couldn't seem to get it. And my saving bridge, praise God, was algebra. For some reason, algebra didn't make any sense, so I didn't try to understand it. I was very good at memorizing formulas and patterns and all of that. So when I finished, I was like a C average, and I was so grateful to be at a C average so I could graduate and finally finish high school.
Wow. So you need to hear your story, because today you're an author, you're a dean at the School of Communication, Journalism and Communication. That seems so far away from what you just told us now at 19 when you're graduating.
Yeah. And when I graduated, I didn't believe that higher education I thought it was wrong. I thought that was seeking world and so I wasn't supposed to do that. And to go from where I did homeschooling, virtually no education in some areas of my life, to now, and this is the context in which I like to say this, because it's praise and honor to God. I now have 2 doctorates,
Wow.
and I'm in journalism and communication.
Doctor.
Yeah, I want you to stutter when you say it.
So it's a doctor.
So, I go from, the contrasts are tremendous. You
Right.
go from no media to over journalism and communication. It's just, it's amazing what God did. I think that one of the key things that happened there at that school was a conceptual change. It provided the door for me to be able to move forward, because what happened is I had been governed by a very rules-based, legalistic, legalism wasn't the issue. I still had legalism when I got beyond this, but I had a very rules-based, black and white, literalistic view of everything. So all I need to do is, what does the scripture say? What does the quote say?
Right.
And that's what I do. It's no reflective interpretation or anything like that. And what happened there was the principal at the time understood where I was coming from with that kind of thinking. And she was able to introduce me to principles. And that's great underlying truths that don't change.
Yeah.
So like modesty is a principle on which we govern our dress.
Right.
So it's not about how many inches from the floor. It's about, within the context of where you live, what is modest?
Right.
What is wholesome? What is not bringing attention to the body,
Right.
but rather adorning the body in an attractive way to bring attention to the character that is housed within this body.
Wow.
And she was able to help me to understand that. She was able to take some of my own arguments that I used for why I did what I did and proving that it was right to show me that it was actually a different reality there. And once I made that switch, then I was able to make changes without getting rid of everything, right? Otherwise, it would have been all or nothing at all. He that offends in one point is guilty of all.
Right.
So then I would have had to abandon everything. But once I learned about principles, I could make, rational, prayerful, well thought out decisions
Right.
Based on that concept of principles to change my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, there are women who are listening who are like, how did you get here? Like, you've been through a lot. It feels like you've lived through centuries and still standing. What would you say to someone who's listening and who's like, that's me?
I would say that God's grace is sufficient for everything that we go through, that there's nothing that we can face that He didn't already plan for, and He can take us through. Yes, I do feel sometimes like I've lived over a century. I've watched my thinking change. It is hard to go through major conceptual changes, but few of us do. Usually we stay very similar in terms of how we've always thought. We may gradually change in some areas, but to go through massive changes in a short period of time is not an easy thing to do. And it wasn't just like one and done. It happened over a period of time. But there's a number of things. First of all, choice is really key. It's the choices you make. Do you choose to take the first step, for example, that you've been given, or are you going to wait for the entire path to be clear? I remember I've been through this many times in life, but probably the incident that stands out in my mind was when I was first asked to mow a lawn in a neighborhood yard, right? Because I never lived in a neighborhood. And now the lady's asking me to mow her lawn when we first moved out to the West Coast before I went to Fountain View. And I started to mow, she showed me how to use the lawnmower. I start pushing it across the lawn. I look up, I saw a car coming. I bolted. I hid. I fled. I ran behind the house and hid. I wasn't used to that. I mean, a car just casually driving down the street. I ran and hid. I look, when it's over, I'm kind of peeking both ways. I look, no cars. I slip out. This is early in the morning. I slip out and come back to the lawnmower. Of course, I hated the loud noise and whatever, but I started pushing the lawnmower to the end of that part, and then turn around. I look, and here's another car. Bam! I bolted again, ran and hid behind the house. I came back to the lawnmower and started cutting again, and I see another car coming. And I made a decision in that moment to keep pushing and not to run. And that became a motto for my life. I realized that if I did not keep pushing, I would never mow the lawn. And that's what happened throughout. And that's what's continued. You have to continue with that next step that's in front of you, no matter how hard it is, no matter how your instincts are telling you to run, or you can't do this, or fear is overwhelming you. You still take that next step. That's become a motto of my life. And everything that I've done that people would call success, outward markers of success, has been from taking that next step as the Lord empowered me to do that and gave me the courage to do that.
Wow.
Praise God.
Amen. Amen.
We are grateful. I am grateful that God had given you the strength to keep pushing.
Yes.
To keep taking that next step.
Yeah.
So that you would be here today with us today and to share your story. We thank you.
Book, Dr. Rachel Williams-Smith, her book, Born Yesterday, the newest edition.
Yes.
Can you say the whole title again for us?
Born Yesterday. It's actually Born Yesterday, New Edition. The true story of a girl born in the 20th century but raised in the 19th.
Yeah.
It's available on Amazon and in 3 formats right now. Okay. So you can get it as an ebook, you can get it as a paperback book, or you can get it as a hardcover copy. And I hope that by summer, the end of summer, I'll also have an audiobook.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my goal, is to have an audiobook. Yeah.
And let me just say, for those of you who are listening and just could not unglue yourself from whatever device you're using, that's just the first part of the book. It's not even, I can't even say she has told you everything. She has not, and I was actually trying to make a whole back. She has not told you everything. That's just 1/3 of it. And some parts, of course, she's just doing the covering, the covering part, because she is now, a successful author, dean, wife, right? So she's married. Right, so a lot to tell. But again, we're not going to say anymore. You have to read the book, whichever format that you like. Any closing thoughts or comments, Rachel?
So now I have to say something really brilliant. I was hoping by pushing the next step. Right. So, but I guess I didn't want to say that, my story may be different in terms of the circumstances, but what's common to all of us is being faced with adversity, having something in your life that feels too big to handle. And you don't have to be, you may be cast down, but you don't have to be destroyed.
Yes.
You may be put on pause, but it doesn't mean that that's the end. You don't have to be conquered by your circumstances. Yeah. There is a God who's working on your behalf, and he can empower you to get through the difficulties that you're facing now. And by taking one step at a time and following him, you truly can experience victory. And I also want to say that victory is not a one-time thing. It's not a destination. It's a process. You can experience victory throughout your life as you hold God's hand, keep it in your hand.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Again, everyone, get your copy of Born Yesterday, New Edition, the true story of a girl born in the 20th century but raised in the 19th century on Amazon. Get your copy today. I'm getting mine.
Yes.
Ayanna has hers already.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to finish the book, read the book, and learn more. And thank you again.
Yes. Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
Sure.
I also do speak. I enjoy sharing my testimony in different formats. I talk to women's ministry. Actually, I'm doing that this weekend, preaching a sermon, giving a workshop in the afternoon. I gave a workshop last week. I've talked to book clubs. I've got one scheduled for next month.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what the needs are. But if there's someone who needs encouragement, who wants to hear a story that, and not just a story, but lessons of life, that can help you to get unstuck from where you are, overcome extremism, or learn forgiveness, which is a huge topic, overcoming adversity, whatever it may be. And there's been a number of topics that I've been asked to speak on, and I really enjoy having that opportunity to share. You can go to my website. It's www.rachelwilliamsmith.com. So that's 2 S's back to back, rachelwilliamsmith.com. And by way of that, you are able to access information on how to reach out to me if you would like to do that.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you, how can people connect with you? But you have your website.
Right.
That's wonderful. That's where they can connect with you and to learn more about you and to see if they want to bring you in and invite you to, so they can hear more.
Right.
There's also an email address, and that's empower@empower-comm.com.
All right.
So empower@empower-comm.com.
Awesome. And trust me, again, this is like the tip of the iceberg, right? Wealth of knowledge, wealth of encouragement, empowerment. Looking forward to hearing more from her. And you will as we go through our series, and we'll invite her back as we need to. And hopefully that will be more, right? So again, great having you, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to seeing you again, bringing you back. So thank you, everybody, for listening to
Black, Beautiful, and Brave.
Triple B out. And there you have it, Queens. Another empowering episode of Triple B in the books.
Remember, the revolution doesn't stop when the episode ends. Keep spreading that Black, beautiful, and brave energy wherever you go.
Stay connected with us on social media. And don't forget to share this podcast with your fellow queens who need a dose of empowerment.
Until next time, keep shining, keep slaying, and keep being unapologetically you.
That's right. Stay fierce, stay fabulous, and remember, your voice is your power. Use it to change the world.
Peace, love, and empowerment, queens. Catch you on the flip side.